All right. So when I first heard the theme Beyond Borders, the first image that came up to my mind was the image of white storks, which is a large species of bird that tends to migrate from place to place. And what I couldn't stop thinking about was how similar it was to the ways we live our lives as everyday human beings. We might be restricted to one place physically, but the internet provided us with the ability to fly farther distances and cover farther destinations. These destinations are what I would like to call knowledge points. Knowledge points, they can honestly be anything, from whether or not Miss Gina prefers cats over dogs, or to even the figures responsible for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Before this, we were simply flightless birds that are restricted by the physical borders laid all around us. If we want to access information from all over the world, our only way to do that at that time was to travel across it, which to most is an opportunity that is quite unreachable. With the invention of forums, content sharing websites, and platforms, we see a time where information can be accessed by people beyond borders. What I'm trying to say is that with the invention of the internet, it provided us with the abilities to fly farther distances and cover farther destinations, just like how storks are able to fly through cities, countries, and continents. Unlike storks, we are still met with one stark limitation, a limitation that considerably restricts our ability to use these wings to the max and cover some parts of knowledge. In a world where knowledge, information, and ideas can be accessed by people beyond borders, there are still walls that span beyond these physical borders that restricts our ability to access some parts of information. These are what I would like to call the invisible wall. So Oxford Language Dictionary defines a wall as a vertical brick or stone structure that encloses or divides an area of land. I would like to create an emphasis on the last part of the definition, where it states that a wall divides an area of land. What happens when this division is not a division of land, but rather a division of knowledge? That's what the invisible wall is basically doing. It's creating barriers between ourselves and some parts of knowledge, when in reality, we're supposed to be able to access these parts of knowledge with the invention of the internet. And this is where I believe I should clarify something. The invisible wall is not censorship. Censorship, while another large factor that encloses our ability to access some parts of information, is rather a iron wall, i.e. it's visible, created by the government in order to restrict people living within it from accessing banned media. The invisible wall is similar in this sense. However, it is different in the sense that what it's doing is completely subliminal. We don't know of its presence, where it is, and how badly it affects our lives. The invisible wall is our inability to see the distortion of knowledge in our own pursuit of it. The invisible wall is our own failure to see how knowledge is often distorted and manipulated by those who hold the power to do it. And this phenomenon is apparent within everyone, no matter how big and strong you are, or how small or weak you are. The invisible wall continues to prevail within everyone. But who? Who is to blame for this? Who is responsible for the invisible wall? Or better yet, who are the constructors of the invisible wall? Well, for one, the invisible wall is carefully constructed by those that control the media that we read. So conceptually, news agencies, their main purpose is to provide readers with information they need or want to know about the world around them. They're basically our messenger pigeons, serving as windows for us to see what's currently happening in places we might otherwise be unable to reach physically. However, it seems that there is a more implicit purpose behind them, to convince the reader towards an idea. News agencies, they are created by humans after all, and we as humans, we are subjective creatures, meaning that we have our own opinions, ideas, values, and our own motivation. I mean, even in some cases, there's people paying other people in order to perceive a certain event in a different way. And an example of this can be seen in the construction of the Berlin Wall. I wouldn't bore you on much on the details. However, the Berlin Wall was basically a guarded concrete barrier that encircled West Berlin, separating it from East Berlin. However, if you were to see it from the Western-leaning resources, you would think that the wall is rather a restriction of freedom for East Berliners, an act of repression. And even in some cases, they commemorate and idolize East Berliners' escape to the West, calling it an escape to freedom, insinuating that East Berlin is rather a dystopian police state. Now, if you were to see it from an Eastern-leaning perspective, you would think that the wall was rather an act of protection. You would think that the decision of the East Berlin government to construct the Berlin Wall was rather a protection from militarism and imperialism from the West. Now, imagine what would happen if you were to only listen to one of these two sources. What would you do if you only heard one of these two sources? Imagine forming opinions of a country you've never visited or a person you've never met solely based on a singular news outlet's portrayal. In our own pursuit of knowledge, there's an illusion of knowing everything necessary, when in reality, you're like looking at the world through a tiny, tiny keyhole. What feels like being informed is rather a detachment from the full picture, creating a world that's curated, distorted, and incomplete. But perhaps it is not only news agencies that are responsible for this invisible wall, but rather we as individuals are supposed to be responsible as well. Which brings me to my next constructor of the invisible wall, ourselves. Confirmation bias refers to the tendency where we read, consume, or search for knowledge that specifically aligns with our own beliefs. Let's take, for example, you believe that all apples are blue, and you're trying to find sources that support this belief of yours. From a simple Google search, you can see that over 100,000 sources say that apples are red and green and not blue. But there's only one source that says apples are blue. Instead of changing your opinion from the overwhelming amount of evidences that says otherwise, you instead choose to opt for the one source that says apples are blue and use it as leverage to show that you are superior amongst others. You choose this one source that supports your own belief and say that I'm right, all apples are blue, and you all are wrong. What I'm trying to get from this example is that with confirmation bias, we seek ratification and validation for our own belief. Confirmation bias refers to the human nature that where we, instead of trying to find absolute fact, we instead try to find the lies that support our flawed opinion. We are trying to find a conclusion that we as individuals, that we personally want to believe. And this is one of the reasons, and this human nature is one of the reasons why the invisible wall is so vast and strong. Confirmation bias serves as one of the main architects in the invisible wall by influencing how we engage with the vast amount of information that is provided to us. In a world where knowledge is theoretically limitless, confirmation bias narrows our field of view, causing us to create borders between ourselves and the vast amount of information available to us unconsciously. And this is where news agencies and even social media comes into the picture. They provide our biases with the foundation needed in order for the invisible wall to be vast and strong. There's even, in some cases, there's even an algorithm that creates, shows us media to see that specifically aligns with our own beliefs, making us feel a lot more superior and validated, when in reality, you're simply reinforcing a world that's inaccurate, incomplete, and manipulated. Together, confirmation bias and news agency purposely limit our scope of the full spectrum of knowledge. So, what now? Now that I know that the invisible wall exists, what should I do now? What can I do? How do I bypass the invisible wall? Well, like I said before, the invisible wall prevails within everyone, meaning that it's different for every individual. I mean, for all we know, it could be bigger for me and smaller for you. Which is why, in order for you to bypass the invisible wall, you would have to start taking action yourself. Challenge your beliefs. Challenge what you already know about the world and ask questions about it. And as you ask questions, you would try to find other sources that answers those questions. When you find other sources, you would tend to cross-check it. It is highly imperative for you to not rely on only one source. And then embrace open-mindedness. Open-mindedness isn't about isn't about like taking everything at face value, but rather it's about us using your ability to inquire to its maximum, causing you to seek different perspectives and engage with the voices you might otherwise ignore. The truth shouldn't be something that comforts your belief, but rather it should be something that makes you want to dig deeper. It should ignite a sense of curiosity within yourself, pushing you to ask questions, engage with different perspectives, and confront ideas we might feel uncomfortable with initially. And just like how white storks are able to fly through mountains, oceans, and deserts, we too can soar, breaking free from the invisible wall and embrace a world where knowledge, ideas, and opinions can be accessed by people beyond physical and invisible borders. I'm Rafa Islandras Nitioso, and thank you for listening.